Hi friends!
Hello!
Again, it's been a while since we came out with a video, and this time we decided why don't we do something together.
Yep.
So on behalf of the Talent Bridge, we're back with another video on mental health. What else?
I'm Zaina and this is Chaya, by the way, just so y'all know again.
So hello once again. We are going through a pretty tough time in the last 6 months. Can we actually call it a traumatic time, Zaina?
Of course we can call it a traumatic time because now the main thing is what is trauma? What could trauma constitute, right? So trauma is basically any emotional response to a negative or a terrible situation that any of us would have faced. And this terrible situation can have violence, sexual abuse, rape, physical abuse, a natural disaster or an accident or anything of that sort, right? So of course that is what trauma has, or that's what trauma is all about. Now there are three types of trauma if you want to think about it in that way, because it's easier to categorize it that way. So you have acute trauma, you have chronic trauma, and you have complex trauma. Now, like the names suggest, acute trauma is an emotional reaction to one single traumatic event. Okay, it can be only one.
And sorry to interrupt you
No
here,
problem.
but when we say a traumatic event, does it actually have to be like the dictionary meaning of trauma? Something should have happened to you physically.
Not necessarily. It can be an emotional, that's what I said. Trauma is an emotional response.
Okay.
It's an emotional attachment or a reaction to an event, a terrible event that has happened. So it can be an emotional abuse. It can be a completely, a toxic relationship that you had with either a parent, or sibling, or even your partner for that matter. Right? It can be absolutely anything. It can be a loss of a pet also, right? So, like when we are talking about loss of a pet for that instance, you remember Srishti, right?
Yes.
Srishti's cat ran away and she was in distress for almost a whole month and is still recovering from that. That is a traumatic event for her, because for her she lost her pet and that is traumatic for her, right? That's exactly what trauma is all about. Now, like I was talking about, acute trauma, chronic trauma, and complex trauma. Like the name suggests, acute trauma is a reaction to one single event. It can be any event for that matter. Like your reaction to this pandemic, right? That is one single trauma. You did not realize what was going to happen. You had plans, like I had plans to go to Canada and study and do lots of other stuff. But when the pandemic hit, I was lost, and it was a kind of a traumatic incident for me. That is acute. Then you have chronic trauma. Chronic trauma is something which is prolonged over the months, over the years, and it can, they are highly stressful events, like say multiple events, right? Say for example, you have child abuse, bullying, sexual violence, domestic violence. Right now, thanks to the pandemic, the cases of domestic violence and child abuse has been on the increasing end over here.
Alcoholism. Somebody
Exactly.
who's subject to alcoholism over a period of time.
Yes, exactly, stuff like that. And then you have complex trauma. Now, complex trauma is an amalgamation of multiple traumas that a person would have had. Say, for example, as a child, the child has experienced child abuse, and in school, bullying, and then once they grew up, or they have a toxic relationship or something like that, and then during that toxic relationship, a parent has passed away. Multiple traumatic events is what constitutes a complex trauma. And it's an umbrella term for a lot of stuff, and then you have stuff that comes under trauma and what is trauma. So, yeah.
So, say for example, there is a person who comes from an abused or a broken family, and the child is unable to obviously speak up about what has happened to him or her, or them, for example.
Yeah.
That person cannot talk about it, and then grows up to, it's there, it's a latent feeling. So they are actually have undergone trauma and are unable to deal with it, and does that manifest in what that person eventually starts doing as an adult also? Would that have a bearing on his decisions or their way of dealing with life?
Most definitely yes. Because what happens in your past is what you are today. It's a series of events that has happened to you for you to have been who you are today. It can be good, bad, ugly, anything for that matter, right? So if you've been brought up in a very loving family, that's what you're going to take forward. If you're going to be brought up in a broken family, that's what you're going to take forward. But it doesn't necessarily mean that everything that has happened in your past is going to happen today in your present, or you would repeat it in the future. It is a part of you, but it is not you. That is what you need to understand. It is just a part of who Chaya is. It's just a part of who Zena is. But it is not entirely who Chaya is, not entirely who Zena is.
So, since this manifests in a mental kind of a scenario, is it treatable?
It is definitely treatable. So, some of the main, or rather, I'll get into the treatment part. Some of the main symptoms, or rather, that what you can see in people who have been, experiencing a kind of a trauma or any kind of trauma, is that you have anxiety, you have fear, you have indecisiveness, you have low self-esteem, you have feelings of hopelessness, feelings of helplessness, feelings of worthlessness, which are also the same symptoms of depression. Correlating.
They kind of mime each
Yes,
other.
they don't mime each other, but there are comorbidities. It's like how we have diabetes and blood pressure. It's something like that. So if you have PTSD, which is what I'm going to get into now, you can also have this as a comorbidity. And you have guilt, you have shame, you have self-blame with saying that it was my fault, everything of that sort. And then you have lots of confusion, like I said, indecisiveness, difficulty making even the smallest choices. And all of this hampers your day-to-day being, your social life, your work life, your domestic life. Everything is affected. Now that is what it means to have a disorder. Because everything is getting affected, literally every aspect of your life. You can't socialize, you can't work properly, you can't take care of yourself. Everything is hampered, right? And that is when you can call it a post-traumatic stress disorder, right? PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's exactly what it is. It is a mental condition.
But this whole self-blame thing, isn't it? Are the people around us actually responsible for making us feel that way?
The society is plays a big role in this to make us feel the way we feel these days, because we're all told what we should be doing,
what is the
right behavior, right? But nobody has ever told us how to cope with any kind of an emotion. Right? You're always told like men are supposed to suppress their feelings and not cry in front of people, while women are supposed to be submissive and docile and not speak their opinions and stuff like that. So it's all a part and parcel of society. Like, you're taught to react in a certain way, but that necessarily does not have to be the right way of reacting to things. And which is why most of us have negative ways of coping with things like alcoholism, drug abuse, any kind of an addiction for that matter, sex addiction, like I said, the stuff that I was talking about earlier. So there are different manifestations of the way you have been coping with any kind of a stressful event. Let it be an emotional stress, a physical stress, any kind of a stress for that matter. That's why when people have to die, or when psychiatrists or psychologists, clinical psychologists to be more precise, diagnose a person with having PTSD, they have a certain criteria. They have to follow the ICD-10 and 11, they have to follow the DSM-5, the DSM-6 is going to come out sometime soon, and they have to follow certain guidelines for them to be treated, or rather for them to be diagnosed of having a certain kind of an illness, any kind of an illness. It's like how medical professions have their Bible.
Yes.
Right? It's like how we have our Bible. Our Bible is the ICD-10, 11 and the DSM-5. Right? So
maybe what we should do is, today that we've educated our friends on what trauma is, what are the different types of trauma, maybe we should take this to another session where we can actually talk more in detail about the symptoms, a little more, throw more light on the symptoms, and also give them hope, give all people around there hope that this is treatable. There is help available.
Yep.
It's not as easy as probably taking an aspirin for my headache, but there is treatment. So maybe in the next session, we do much more. We can talk about what are the different types of addictions that rise out of this, and how, you know, people like you help others handle it, or rather manage this whole stress
It's
situation.
more of management than cure, because there's no sure shot answer like saying, like you said, take an aspirin and you'll feel better. It's always about management. It's not entirely curable. It's not something that you can just pop in a pill and you'll
It's
feel
done.
better. It's done. ठीक है, एक
I have
session-
a tumor and I take
exactly,
it.
or something like that. Again, tumors again can also
Come back.
It's
Yes.
something like that,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So when you have something like PTSD, you have flashbacks, you have memories, you have certain triggers, and people start avoiding all of these triggers, and that again manifests in a different way. So like you said, we can talk about the treatments in the next episode or something like that, but just to throw a little bit of light on what types of treatments could be there. There could be behavioral treatments, there could be exposure therapy, there can be EMDR. All of this will be talked about in the next session, and then obviously medical help as well. Because most often than not, therapy plus medication is always
Recommended.
recommended.
Okay.
So sorry, I've been coughing, but that's it for today.
Thanks for watching, and keep liking, keep subscribing for more and more information on mental health and various other issues. Bye bye.